December 16, 1985, 5:22 p.m., East 46th Street, Manhattan. The city is loud. Holiday crowds packed onto every sidewalk. Yellow cabs honking, steam rising from manholes. Nobody paying attention to the black Lincoln Town Car pulling up outside Sparks Steakhouse. Nobody except four men in matching trench coats. Paul Castellano, the boss of the most powerful crime family in America, stepped out of that car and walked straight into an ambush. 10 shots, 20 seconds. He never made it through the front door, and parked across the street watching it happen sat two men. One of them was John Gotti, the man who'd ordered the hit. The other was Salvatore Gravano, the man who'd made sure it actually worked. That night changed everything, but not in the way Gravano expected. 6 years after that murder, Gravano would be standing in a federal courtroom, putting the man he'd made boss behind bars for the rest of his life. Not because he got caught, not because he broke under pressure, but because John Gotti, the man he'd bled for, got greedy and decided to use him as a scapegoat. This is the story of Sammy the Bull, the underboss who committed 19 murders, helped dismantle his own crime family, and walked out of prison in 5 years. March 12, 1945. Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. Salvatore Gravano came into the world in a neighborhood where reputation was everything. His father ran a small garment factory. His mother kept a clean house. They weren't connected to anything criminal. They were just trying to get by. But Sammy was wired differently from the start. By 13, he was running with a Brooklyn street gang called the Rampers. One afternoon, some older kids stole his bicycle. Most kids would have let it go. Gravano found all three of them and fought them at the same time. Got his bike back, walked away. A group of mobsters sitting outside a nearby cafe watched the whole thing. They made a mental note. That kid doesn't fold. By 16, school was finished for him. He dropped out of Lafayette High and made the streets his classroom. Truck hijackings, warehouse burglaries, small scores that got bigger every year. At 18, he walked away from a single job with $9,000 in his pocket, more than his father made in an entire year. He wasn't looking back. The real turning point came in 1970. Gravano was 25, working as muscle for a Gambino family capo named Salvatore Aurello. Aurello had a problem, a man named Joseph Colucci who disrespected the family and needed to disappear. He looked at Gravano and said, "Handle it." Gravano did. He lured Colucci out under the pretense of easy money, got him in a car, shot him multiple times at close range. The body was dumped in Brooklyn and never officially recovered. The murder was never solved. In mob terms, Gravano had just made his bones. He was now a killer on the payroll. Over the next several years, Gravano's reputation grew fast. In 1976, he was formally inducted into the Gambino family, a closed-door ceremony, an oath of silence, a blood oath that was supposed to mean everything. By the early 80s, he wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was running a construction company called Marathon Development Corporation. On paper, a legitimate contracting business. In practice, a racket that rigged bids, muscled out competitors, and funneled money up the chain every single week. He also ran loan sharking and bookmaking operations across New York. If you borrowed from Gravano's people and missed a payment, nobody sent a letter. They sent men. And those men were very good at their jobs. What made Gravano valuable wasn't the violence. It was the discipline. He didn't crave the spotlight. He coached his son Gerard's little league team. He drove his daughter Karen to school every morning. He lived in a modest house on Staten Island. While John Gotti was out buying custom suits and talking to news cameras, Gravano was quietly running the machinery. By 1985, he had 15 made men and over 100 associates under him. He was pulling in hundreds of thousands a month for the family, and he had the respect of the boss, Paul Castellano. But Castellano had enemies inside his own house. Paul Castellano ran the Gambino family like a corporation. He lived in a Staten Island mansion, wore tailored suits, and preferred white-collar rackets, construction contracts, labor unions, political influence. He banned drug dealing within the family, calling it too much risk. John Gotti's crew was deep in heroin. Castellano knew it, and Castellano was starting to talk about making an example of Gotti. Gotti found out first. He began building a coalition. Other capos who resented Castellano's style, felt cut off from the money, wanted a different direction. One of his key recruits was Gravano. And Gravano had his own reason for saying yes. Years earlier, Castellano had ordered the murder of Gravano's brother-in-law, Nicholas Cibetta, without ever informing Gravano. Cibetta had insulted a Gambino associate. Castellano had him killed quietly and buried the whole thing. Gravano found out later and never let it go. So when Gotti came to him with a plan to remove Castellano permanently, Gravano didn't hesitate. December 16th, 1985. Sparks Steakhouse, East 46th Street. 4 shooters in identical coats positioned themselves outside. When Castellano's car pulled up at 5:25 p.m., they moved. Castellano took 6 bullets. His underboss, Tommy Bellotti, was shot 4 times trying to flee. Both died on the sidewalk. The shooters walked east and vanished into the rush hour crowd. Gotti and Gravano watched from across the street and drove away. The most audacious mob assassination in modern American history took 10 seconds to execute, and it worked. Gotti became boss. Gravano became consigliere and eventually underboss. For a few years, they ran New York together, while Gotti held press conferences outside the Ravenite Social Club and let the press photograph him like he was a movie star. Gravano was running everything that actually mattered. He collected tribute, he managed the construction rackets, he handled problems quietly. In 1989, Gotti suspected a top associate named Robert DiBernardo of skimming money. He told Gravano to take care of it. Gravano lured DiBernardo to a meeting in Brooklyn, shot him in the back of the head. The body was packed into a barrel, never found. Then came the one that cost Gravano something. Louis Milito had been his closest friend since childhood. They'd grown up together in Bensonhurst. They'd committed crimes together going back to their teenage years. But in 1988, Milito made the mistake of complaining to other soldiers that the bosses were keeping too much money. It got back to Gotti. Gotti told Gravano to handle it. Gravano tried to talk him out of it. Gotti wouldn't move. On March 8, 1988, Gravano called Milito to a meeting. Milito walked in expecting to talk business. Gravano's crew was waiting. Gravano didn't pull the trigger himself. He gave the order. They shot Louis Milito and buried him in a lot in Brooklyn. His wife Linda spent years trying to find out what happened to him. She never got a straight answer. That's the part they don't usually put in mob movies. You end up killing the people you actually care about, and then you go home and act like nothing happened. The FBI had been building toward this for years. They planted bugs inside the Ravenite Social Club, and in the apartment upstairs where Gotti held his most sensitive conversations. For months, they recorded everything. Murder discussions, tribute collections, complaints about rival families, and eventually conversations about Gravano. On those tapes, Gotti said things he never should have said out loud. He complained that Gravano was getting too much credit. He suggested that if the case came apart, Gravano would take the fall for the murders. He was laying the groundwork, building a story where Gravano was the decision-maker and Gotti was just the boss who didn't know the details. In November 1991, the FBI played selected recordings for Gravano's lawyer. They wanted him to hear exactly what his boss thought of him. He heard it. Gravano had killed 19 people for this family. He'd made Gotti boss. He'd cleaned up every mess, managed every operation, and stayed invisible while Gotti took the credit. And now, Gotti was preparing to hand him to the government as a sacrifice. In mob law, protecting yourself by setting up a loyalist is a violation. The code Gotti had invoked to justify every murder in his career. He'd just broken it himself. Gravano's lawyer reached out to the U.S. Attorney's Office with 3 words: "Sammy wants to talk." The prosecutors couldn't believe what was sitting across the table from them. Over multiple sessions, Gravano laid out the entire architecture of the Gambino family. The Castellano hit, who planned it, where the shooters came from, where Gotti was standing when it happened. 19 murders, described in full detail. The construction rackets, The tribute structure. Names, dates, locations, methods. He wasn't just giving them Gotti, he was giving them everything. The trial opened February 12, 1992 in Brooklyn Federal Court. Gotti sat at the defense table in a tailored suit, looking like a man who'd already won. He'd beaten the feds 3 times. He wasn't afraid. On March 2nd, Gravano took the stand. For 9 days, he testified. He didn't hedge. He didn't minimize. He sat in that chair and admitted to being a killer, a racketeer, a conspirator, and then he explained methodically how John Gotti was all of those things too. Gotti's lawyers came at him hard. They called him a serial killer, a liar, a man who'd sell out anyone to keep himself alive. Gravano agreed with most of it, but he kept saying the same thing. I'm not lying about this. The tapes backed him up on every point that mattered. April 2nd, 1992. The jury came back, guilty on all counts. John Gotti, the Teflon Don, the man the media had turned into a folk hero, sat completely still. For once in his life, he had nothing to say. On June 23, 1992, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And on September 26, 1994, Salvatore Gravano was sentenced to 5 years for 19 murders, with time already served. He walked out in under a year. 5 years. 19 murders. The families of the victims stood outside that courthouse and called it an obscenity. The government didn't disagree. They just didn't care. Gravano had delivered Gotti. That was the deal. In 1995, Gravano entered the Federal Witness Protection Program, relocated to Tempe, Arizona. New name? Quiet life, government stipend. He lasted 4 years. By 1999, he was running an ecstasy distribution network across Arizona. His son, his daughter, his wife, all involved. Thousands of pills a week. Millions of dollars moving through a criminal enterprise in the desert. The DEA and FBI arrested him on February 24, 2000. They took him, his entire family, and 36 other members of the operation in a single sweep. This time, there was no cooperation deal, no sweetheart arrangement. In 2002, a federal judge sentenced him to 20 years. He'd gotten 5 years for 19 murders and blown the deal in less than half a decade. He served 17 years and was released in 2017. He was 72 years old. He moved back to Arizona, started a podcast, a YouTube channel. He tells war stories, does interviews, sells merchandise, and regularly states on camera that he has no regrets. John Gotti died in a maximum security prison in Missouri on June 10, 2002, 61 years old. Throat cancer. The empire he'd clawed his way to the top of had collapsed around him, and he'd spent a decade watching it from a cell. Louis Milito was never found. His wife Linda is still looking for answers. Robert DiBernardo was never found. The families of 19 men never got justice. They got a press release about a cooperating witness and a reduced sentence. Here's what this story actually reveals. The mafia doesn't run on loyalty. It runs on the threat of what happens when loyalty breaks. The code, omertà, the oath, the ceremony with the candle and the blood, all of it only functions as long as the people at the top believe it applies to them too. John Gotti stopped believing that. He looked at a man who'd killed for him, built for him, protected him, and decided that man was expendable. He said it out loud, on a recording, in a building the FBI had already bugged. That decision cost him everything. Gravano didn't destroy the Gambino family. Gotti's ego did. Gravano just formalized the damage in a federal courtroom. The family never recovered. No more construction monopolies, no more union control, no more untouchable bosses giving press conferences on Mulberry Street. The Gambinos today are a fraction of what they were. Squeezed from every direction, leadership cycling in and out of prison. The power structures Gravano described on that witness stand now permanently exposed. What Gravano understood, maybe better than anyone, is that survival isn't a betrayal. It's the only rule that actually holds. Everything else, the oath, the code, the brotherhood, those are stories you tell soldiers to keep them in line. When it's your life on the table, you do the math. Sammy Gravano did the math, and the mafia has never been the same.